Hello and welcome to Triton Squadron episode 4. Sorry for the delay to all our loyal fans out there, but winter break and finals and everything. Today, Liam and I are joined by Shane
Hello there.
and Anish.
General Kenobi.
And because of this big delay between our episodes, why don't we just talk about our favorite recent Star Wars thing? Mine personally is, I'll actually get right now. I got first issue of The Blade. I read it. It's really, really good. Like the opening scene, like the opening panel is really, really funny. Because slight spoilers, but Porter Angle is very different from what we see in phase one to phase two. And there's a little reference to Porter Angle in phase one in the first panel of the Blade, and I think it's really funny.
Yeah, so in my case, I've been reading a lot of Legends books recently. We've pretty much had no Star Wars shows between the end of Andor about a month or so ago, and then we got Bad Batch like next week. But there's been a bit of a hiatus. I've been reading a lot of Legends, mainly New Jedi Order, Band of Thrawn, Dawn of the Jedi. I'm on that one right now, and I'm enjoying it. It's classic Legends, a lot of really weird and wacky stuff, but it's been fun.
For me, I actually just rewatched all of the Bad Batch, so I'm gonna say that's what I'm really into right now, especially since it's coming out with season 2 next week. So I'm extremely excited for that. I usually don't watch trailers, but I couldn't resist and watch the season 2 trailer, and it looks amazing.
Yeah, I'm also pretty excited for season 2 of Bad Batch. I think it looks like it's going to be really, really awesome. In terms of like my favorite Star Wars thing that's recent, I'm actually going to take a slightly different direction. I've been um I've been working recently with some of the Star Wars costume groups in the community, and that's pretty recent for me. I know they've been around for a while, and so my favorite Star Wars thing right now is actually just the community because they've been super helpful in figuring out how I want to make like my costume. I'm looking at the Saber Guild right now, the like choreography official group, and so that's been a lot of fun, and it's been a lot of fun to get started in.
Yeah, and talking about costuming, I think that's super cool because us as a club, we're all involved with the fan film production right now. And so, Anish, as executive producer, do you have any comments, things to say about the fan film?
Yeah, I'm very excited for where the fan film is going. I think we have a really cool story. I think we have a really interesting premise. We're in the process of casting, we're writing the script, location scouting, all those things are in progress. But hopefully in winter, we can get a lot of you guys in the club involved, whether it's just showing up on set as extras or helping out as PAs, whatever it may be. I think that this could be probably the biggest thing we've done collectively as a club. Honestly, it's amazing that we're able to come to even this extent after existing for only like 2.5 years, honestly. So I'm very excited for the future of it.
Yeah, I'm also super excited. Shane, Liam, do you guys have anything? Liam, because you're our costume and makeup guy.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm very excited, especially since I essentially created the characters. I designed them. Obviously Shane and Alex are like fleshing them out more while writing the script. But I'm very excited to bring these characters to life. I'm going to start working on costumes soon after we get casting done. But it's been a very, very amazing process so far.
yeah, Shane.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm really excited as well. Our story, I think, is a really, really cool story, and it's pretty unique in terms of the Star Wars fan films. I think it really kind of the work that was put in by the 4 or 5 people that were in the room during the story meeting managed to flesh out a really cool and unique story that will really stand out. And I mean, I'm a fight choreographer by preference, and there's quite a bit of fighting in this story. So I am very excited for that. It's going to be very cool. We've got some very unique things set up that I think will be really cool for all of the club members to watch. Brian, any words as our fearless leader?
Yeah, I'm actually most excited to like bringing all this stuff to life on screen. I think that'll be the most fun part in working with everyone. Like all our meetings, we've had really good conversations, and I'm just really excited to how this will turn out in the end. And I've like high hopes, not gonna lie. All right. And so Liam's already mentioned Bad Batch. Bad Batch season 2 is coming out. It'll probably be out by the time this episode is out, but it's coming out January 4th.
Yeah.
So me personally, I only watched Bad Batch season 1 once, and not gonna lie, I've kind of forgotten some of it. But
Don't worry, I got you. I watched all of it in one sitting.
yeah, I do remember the baby Rancor though. That was cute.
Oh yeah, Moochie the
Yeah.
baby Rancor.
So what are we looking forward to in season 2?
Crosshair Redemption. I want a Crosshair Redemption so bad because even though he did everything that he did in season 1, I still love him a lot and I want him to get back with the group. So I really hope that happens, and I'm excited to see how it happens if it does.
Thoughts on Crosshair Redemption, Anish, Shane?
Yeah, I mean, Crosshair is probably my favorite character in the Bad Batch as of now. I mean, I really liked the reveal. I think this was around the end of Bad Batch season 1. I've only seen it once as well, but like he revealed that his chip was taken out, but he still supports the Empire. That scene alone made him such a complex character, honestly. And just on that note, we know from the trailer, it's not a spoiler. It was in the trailer like a year ago. We get Commander Cody. He's back, and he's interacting with Crosshair. I'm very excited to see where Crosshair's ideology on clones and the purpose of enhanced clones in the Empire goes, because he's talking to Cody, who's a regular clone. And I really want to see how those interactions play out, as hopefully we see more clones that we know. I love the Bad Batch, obviously, but we're going to see Rex as well. He was in the trailer. Hopefully we see the Republic commandos like Delta Squad again. So just people like that showing up, I think, has a lot of potential, especially at this point in the galaxy where the clones don't have a purpose. They're still trying to find out what to do. And I think given the setting and the characters, there's a lot of potential here, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I am really excited for all the episode titles that involve clones, because I would love to see more of just your generic average clone. We saw in season 1 the beginnings of the possible clone rebellion, where clones start really questioning whether the Empire, as a successor state, is the same as what they fought for the Republic, and whether the actions they've been asked to do for the Empire are just and are right, and whether they can actually follow those orders. And so I'm really excited to see where that thread takes us, to see more clones beginning to kind of question the orders they've been given and question the Empire, and see how those average clones who were literally born and bred to be soldiers for this idea of a republic react to a non-democratic fascist state. I think that is a awesome thread that can really delve into like the intricacies of what it is like to be a clone in Star Wars. And I'm really excited to see what seeds that Bad Batch season 2 plants towards that.
Yeah, and I think talking about that, I think we see that in Andor, which is the topic of today's episode. Because there's that one scene, and it's when Cassian is young and they just hung his dad on Rick's Road, and you see that squad of clone troopers that are like pushing people back. And obviously we see that, and then like we think like, oh, like why is it clone troopers that are doing that? Like they're not supposed to be like but I think again like the differences between the Republic and the Empire, I think it's a very, me personally, I think it's a very thin line between the two, because even when Cassian was on not Ferrix, I'm on when Cassian was on Canary, that was a Republic ship that crashed, and like that was the Republic that did that to his planet, not the Empire. So I think that was really, really interesting to see, because obviously there's like other stories about like the Republic not being the best, but Andor really like made it obvious that, oh, like the Empire was the next step in a way for the Republic, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, what does it say about the Republic's government that they literally bred super soldiers in order to fight for them instead of going out and fighting for themselves? And I mean, we see the ending of where these clones go. We know what happens to several of them at least. We know that a few of them end up having to become essentially hermits inside a walking house. We see in the Kenobi show the beggar clone, the one who's trying to get a few credits by begging on the street. Can you help a poor veteran? So we know where they end up. And I think it's there's a lot of possibilities here to show like the in between for these clones and how they personally feel about it, and to reflect on like what you mentioned, Brian, where like the Republic's not that different from the Empire in the grand scheme of things. They still bred an entire race of people to fight their battle for them. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how the Bad Batch touches upon all of that.
Yeah, and also I think the end of the Bad Batch, the post-credit scene, whatever, like that like mountain place does, because Dave Filoni loves his Mandoverse. We're definitely gonna I think get some Snoke hints or Grogu hints in season 2 for sure.
Yeah, so the mountain place is a planet called Wayland, which was in the Legends Thrawn trilogy. So it does directly connect to the backstory, or not the backstory, but the story of Thrawn in Legends. It's a cloning planet. There's a long story Legends where a Jedi from the Clone Wars died during that era, but he cloned himself. He went insane, tried to team up with Thrawn, and there was a clone of Luke with an extra U. So this is that planet, basically. And that being in Bad Batch has me very excited because cloning as a whole is so central to Star Wars, and I feel like there's a lot of cool stories with that you can tell. Like there are some theories that the Zillo Beast from Clone Wars was ultimately cloned on Wayland and is going to be in the Bad Batch. There are hints of it in the trailer. I'm not fully sure. I mean, we'll see. But like that planet and what it presents could be very interesting. There's theories that Grogu could show up. He's involved in the cloning, Mandoverse, Snoke stuff, whatever, right? And I think it has potential for connections to a lot of things, whether it's just callbacks to Legends, but also connections to the Mandoverse. So yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Somehow Grogu returned.
if we see like a baby Din Djarin, I'm gonna lose it. I'm just gonna lose it.
I love that you brought up the Zillo Beast because I didn't know about that theory, and that actually has me excited because I actually don't like that little arc in the Clone Wars because it amounted to literally nothing. Like in that show, they didn't do anything with it because it ended with Palpatine asking for that scientist to clone the Beast, and then
Yeah.
that was it. They didn't play with that in the rest of the show. And I felt like that was something they could do. Like, oh no, there's another Zillo Beast, like do an episode on that, and they didn't. So that would be really cool to see just because it would tie up that loose end, even though it's not really that important. But
Well, yeah, because I mean also like we know that, well, have you this is kind of, well, stuff that happens in Thrawn alliances.
I have read
Um,
alliances.
Okay. Like this stuff with like the cortosis stuff. It's
Yes.
like, we know that the Empire does not have, or like did not have like clone armor that can like deflect lasers and like deflect lightsabers. So knowing that they don't have that, if the Zillo Beast does show up in Bad Batch, just like what happens to it, I think will be cool to see.
Yeah.
I think honestly, as much as tie-ins can be a little bit much at times, this does bring an interesting, I don't know, I'm gonna nerd out a little bit. Empire's Imperial production facilities. I think this brings up the interesting possibility of like, if they cloned a Zillo Beast, what happened to it to prevent like their ability to have blaster-proof armor from the Zillo Beast? Was it not able to be harvested enough? But that also is something that could relate to, we've got Mandalorian season 3 coming out soon. And we do know that in the backstory of The Mandalorian, all the way from season 1, we've known that the Empire basically purged Mandalore. They just completely decimated the planet and the people to the point that they killed so many Mandalorian warriors that they just have ingots of former armor just lying around, that they can pay. Not a lot, it's a rare substance, but they're able to pay a bounty hunter with ingots of his own people's armor because they've just wiped out that many of them. Beskar kind of exists in a similar place in the Star Wars universe to the Zillo Beast hide, in that it marginally can deflect some blaster bolts. It deflects a fair amount of lightsabers if you're not mishandling it and accidentally slice open your own leg. So it also raises that question that you could tie into the upcoming season 3 and remind people that Mandalorian exists of why didn't they also use Beskar? Why didn't they use the Zillabeast hide? What is it about their Imperial production that stops them from being able to use all these materials? And does that relate to their transition between a clone army to a all volunteer conscription force? Like, is it a size problem? Did they suddenly expand their military too large to be able to have this kind of armor used on troopers or on like vehicles or anything like that? There's a lot of cool questions that bringing back a character like the Zilla Beast can then start sprinkling into the rest of the universe that we know.
Yeah, and talking about that transition from clones to conscripts, I think that was the thing that I was most looking forward to in Bad Batch, honestly, was that. And then we did get that towards the end, right, with the like TK troopers or something, right, Liam? Yeah, so
Yeah,
that was cool to see.
what's his name? Gregor was training like conscripted soldiers in wherever he was when he was rescued.
Yeah, so that was really cool to see. Well, that's enough about Bad Batch. Let's get to the real topic of today's episode, Andor season 1, which I think is not a hot take, is the best Star Wars content to come out like in a while. It's really good. If you guys haven't watched it, you guys should definitely give it a watch. It's worth every second. It's like, and everything about it is just so good. Like Liam, Anish, Shane, you guys have anything to gush before we get into actual topics?
Yeah, so the analogy I like to use is that I like Mando, I like Boba Fett, I like Kenobi, but when you watch them, you feel like you're eating candy, and when you watch Andor, you feel like you're eating a well-prepared meal. Not
I
to
like
shit
that a
on
lot.
Mando, because I like Mando, but Andor is on a different level entirely in terms of its characters, its world building, the writing put into every aspect of the show. And I think this is something a lot of the fandom has noticed. It's not really a hot take, like Brian said, but it's unbelievably good. It's insane how good it is.
All right, well, I guess I'll follow that. I agree 1,000%. The one thing that I am most excited about that Andor shows is actually more of an overall thing with Star Wars, and that's that Star Wars is showing more and more that it is not afraid to do its own thing. It's coming out with genre fiction. It's coming out with highly localized stories. It is not relating everything to the Skywalkers. It is not relating everything to the Jedi. It's not making everything a galaxy wide, the universe will end if I don't do this MacGuffin thing. It's not afraid to spend the time building characters in a hyper localized settings, like some of the planets in Andor. Some of those characters we're probably never going to see again. If you think about it, like half the characters we saw in the Prison Break, we're never going to see again. But it still spent the time to flesh them out and make them real people, which I think is great. I like that it was a slightly longer season than we're used to with Star Wars, because that gave them time. My one caution with it is just that we'll talk about the Fandom Menace in some future episode, I'm sure, but I have noticed that it's become a flashpoint for some folks within the Star Wars community who are less than content with current Star Wars projects, where they use Andor as a way to say, see, all these other shows could have been this. Why couldn't they make this? How dare you, Disney, ruin my childhood? I think that Andor fits into all the rest of the shows. And I think that, like, Anish, what you said about the candy and the meal is really true. And I think that, like, Andor shows that you can tell a really developed localized story with a good amount of, like, episodes, and you can really build into character development, but it's a genre. Like, Andor is trying to go for, like, that serious dramatic genre that you'll see where it's like drama shows, right? But it also shows that there is still room for other genres. Like you mentioned, The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian started as a Western, in space. So what Andor says to me, and why I'm really excited for it and for the future of it and other Star Wars shows, is that Star Wars is unafraid of doing its own thing, committing to a story, committing to character development, and telling genre stories, going into genre fiction, and not necessarily worrying about, hey, is this going to be blockbuster level commercial? They're just now telling a story. And I think that that is a huge step in a positive direction for all nerd franchise fiction, that I'm really excited to see how it pans out in the future.
Yeah, I also really, really enjoyed the fact that it was focused on essentially two planets. Was it was Ferrix and then Ferrix and Coruscant basically, and not mostly Ferrix, I guess, but it was pretty much Ferrix and Coruscant. What's happening to a specific group of people on this planet, and then what's happening to a specific group of people within the rebellion. Because a lot of rebellion stuff that we've seen has been very like all encompassing. Like rebels started out pretty localized to Lothal, but eventually it became super all encompassing of like the entire rebellion. But Andor has focused on just this little cell that Andor may or may not stay with, and just like really honed in on this one part of the story. And I really appreciated that. And I hope that we see more content that's just focused on very specific parts of the saga. I also really like that it had that like there was no mention of Jedi ever, I don't think. Like none of that, which I love the Jedi, they're great, but it was really refreshing to be able to watch something that did not mention them at all.
Yeah, it
There,
was.
there are
Yeah,
theories Luthen's a Jedi, but I really hope he's not for many reasons.
I think that's so stupid that people are thinking that Luthen was like a Padawan that escaped Order 66 and started like, yeah, I think this speaks to what Shane was talking about certain members of the fandom like using this as a flashpoint for Star Wars content in general. Is like there are those people that want everything to be related back to the Jedi and Sith and the overall war between good and evil. And like, yeah, like that's what Star Wars was built on. Like that's what episode 4 is. But like I think we've had that for 40 years now, 50 years. I think it's time to move away from that and yeah, tell more localized stories because that's I think what speaks to more people now, at least. It's these like small scale stories.
And Star Wars has become just so big as a saga that like you can't keep doing all-encompassing stories anymore. It's going to get tedious. Like you have to fill in little gaps in the saga, and not all of them are going to be about the Skywalkers.
Yeah, I'm gonna plug. It's probably bad marketing, but I'm gonna plug another podcast because there is a podcast that talked about this. That is a really positive podcast in the Star Wars community, and that's the Rex and Around show. They talked about in one of their episodes the tendency of fans to create headcanon, where they build up their headcanon in their head of this is what I want the story to be. And they do that years before the projects come out because they announce projects years in advance to build excitement. And then when the project, does its own thing, because filmmakers and creators generally want to tell their own story and not some story they magically read from your mind. Then fans get mad because it didn't match what their headcanon said. And I think that honestly, maybe it's a controversial point, but I think that the old legends encouraged this because the old legends created all of these godlike characters where they survived 70 wars and they could move planets with a flick of the finger, and they would pull moons out of the sky and create black holes out of nothing. Like they created these just stupidly powerful deities that are able to survive anything. Like that's basically what Luke was in Legends, that people get upset that that's not what they see in actual canon. But if we think of like Andor isn't trying to build deities or gods. Andor is a story of people. It's a story of people put in a bad situation, that are put under an active, huge amount of oppression. What would people do in that scenario? What does asymmetrical warfare look like in that scenario of a massive government versus this small republic cell? And what does it do to the individual, to the person? And I think that kind of storytelling, it will both feed into fans who are looking for like, oh, Star Wars should be this intellectual thing and not the children's series with magical space wizard and glow swords. it feeds into that where they're like, oh, it could be so much more. Why isn't everything like this? But at the same time, it also kind of pokes at those people because it's like, hey, not everything needs to be huge. Not everything needs to be galaxy ending. Not everything has to happen to the Skywalkers or the Jedi. There are people in the Star Wars universe, and they can just do people things.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a very it's an interesting balance because I do agree with you to an extent that Legends has caused people to like headcanon characters. Like I would say Luke, and then they saw Luke in Last Jedi and they were like, oh, why isn't he all powerful? Why isn't he a god going out and taking down the First Order? I feel like that kind of mindset does carry over to Andor, even like you said, but I feel like to an extent it's not even Legends, it's just how the other Star Wars shows have been up to this point, aside from Andor, because we've had Mandalorian, we've had Bad Batch, Book of Boba Fett, Kenobi, all of which were very fan service and cameo heavy. That's just how they were. With the exception of Mando season one, I feel like everything else was pretty much like there's a cameo every episode, every couple episodes. Let's just put him in. Most of them were Filoni run, which yeah, he does that, but that's really what people are used to. And I have a few friends who really enjoy that kind of storytelling. That and when they saw Andor, they were just disoriented, I guess. They were like, what is this going to tie into? This seems kind of standalone. It's kind of random because Star Wars fans naturally want the connection. It's like the MCU style of storytelling, right? It's like you see a character show up in this, okay, they're going to be in this show next, and that connects to this. Okay, that makes sense. For Andor, there are no connections. I mean, yeah, it's about Cassian from Rogue One, but like this is not going to connect to Mando. This is not going to have, I don't know, Roken from Kenobi show up. It's not going to have Boba Fett make a cameo. It's not going to have young Grogu running around on Narkina 5. Like, it makes no sense, right? So I feel like that kind of mindset is what a large majority of the Star Wars fandom has. And Andor was the show that the fandom needed to kind of call them out in a certain way and be like, let's make a show with just good storytelling, good writing, and we'll only use cameos when necessary. Because Andor uses two big cameos. They use Admiral Yularen and Saw Gerrera, basically, right? And they're only in like one or two scenes max. But they're in the story because it makes sense for them to be in the story in universe. Like, you couldn't really imagine anyone else there in those positions, right? But Andor has opportunities to force in known characters, and it doesn't. It focuses on new characters and building them up, like Luthen, for example. He's a new character created by this show, and he's one of my favorite Star Wars characters already. And Andor really just did its own thing, which I very much appreciated.
Spicy comment on that. I guess you could say that in that regards, Andor is to Star Wars TV what The Last Jedi was to Star Wars movies.
Yeah, that's perfect, honestly.
Yeah, because
But
I
I know
think
we
it
actually
did,
like it kind of way.
but in the way that it like subverted everyone's expectations as to like what it was gonna be. But even though I'd say Andor has the same amount of big revelations, right? Like the end of Andor, like we see them, they're building parts for the Death Star. I think that's a huge revelation. I mean, obviously people were theorizing that, but I think the amount of stuff that was like revealed was still like big, uh, in a sense.
Yeah,
And
Yeah.
also,
sorry. As soon as they introduced the factory and with the where they're all just making that same part over and over, I was like, Death Star. And it was still like I was still blown away to see that at the end. Like
yeah, that
they
was
revealed that and I
crazy.
was like, oh my god, I was right, it's the freaking Death Star.
Yeah.
But sorry for interrupting you.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, speaking back to your point, Liam, about the amount of stuff that's in the Star Wars universe. I saw a TikTok like today, and it was about how much money you would have to spend to catch up with every Star Wars thing that came out in 2022. And it was like $1,200 with everything just this year, because there are like 86 comic issues, but like 3 shows, 4 shows, like 12 books. And then like they even like included like stuff that was like in like the Star Wars Insider magazine. So just like the amount of stuff that came out, that comes out every year for Star Wars, is so much to keep up with. That like, yeah, like not everything can be about the Skywalkers. I think we can talk about specific characters now. Obviously we can just start with Andor. He was just this like the spy guy from Rogue One. Um, I remember when I first watched Rogue One, I guess Cassian was like a cool character to me, and that last scene with him and Jin did like hit when they were on the beach. But I honestly didn't expect them to ever make a show, and I don't think anyone did, for Disney or Lucasfilm to make a show about this one kind of throwaway character that we know dies, um, and make it into this like amazing like series, right? But yeah, like my thoughts on Andor as a character in the show is like, I think it was most interesting to see him as like just a guy in the beginning, just like trying to get through. I mean, like he kills those two Premor guys in in the beginning, and I'm not saying that he should have killed them, but he was justified in doing so. And then all this stuff that you see with him on that like Vegas planet, that beach planet, I'm blanking on the name, on a Niamos with like the shore trooper, and obviously like arresting him on something that he didn't do. I think Andor was the most like, okay, you can put every character in this show to a person in real life, or you can apply everything that happens in the show to real life. And I think Star Wars has always been about real world politics and stuff. But I think Andor really, really made that obvious to a lot of people. And that's what I loved most about it, I think.
Yeah, for me with Andor as a character, we go into the show knowing how he's going to die. We know his fate, basically. Like the first thing we see on screen is like 5 BBY. He has 5 years left to live, basically, right? And we see the time grappler every couple episodes hitting on his thing. Time is a recurring motif. So we know in that 5 years of life that he has left, what is he going to do with it? He starts out, like Brian said, as someone who's running. He's a thief. Like he hates the Empire, yeah, but like he doesn't have the guts to face them. He just wants to steal from them. He wants to just get by. He wants to help his mom. He wants to just go about his life, right? And it's a story of how do you take someone who is too scared to rise up and make them an ultimate believer willing to do anything against authority, right? Because in Rogue One, he even says, you know, I've done all these bad things on behalf of the rebellion. I've been like a spy, a saboteur, an assassin. And Andor season 1 is really the first half of that arc. It's like you take someone who doesn't care, or not, it's not that he doesn't care, he's too scared to rise up. So someone who's too scared and takes someone like that and make him willing to go to Luthen at the end and say, you kill me or you let me join. Like those are my only two options, right? And season 2, I think we're going to see him do more and more drastic things on behalf of the rebellion to show how much he really cares. But the way in which they did his arc in season 1 was really well done, because we saw him at first on Aldhani. He told Nemik he was only in it for the credits, right? At that point, he didn't care about the cause. He was like, I'm just in it. I'll get the money. I'll go back. I'll go on with my life, right? But he saw people like Nemik, and speaking of which, a side note, Nemik and his manifesto, dude, it's amazing. One of the best parts of the show. But you saw how characters like Nemik influenced him to do good. You saw how people like Skeen represented the worst of him, the thief who just wants to take the credits and run away. And then after that, he's captured and put in prison on Arkina 5, and we see his ability to inspire Kino to inspire everyone else. And because of that, he gets out, he finds hope again. And then going into Ferrix, he is able to go there, he rescues Bix, he helps everyone get off world. And that's the perfect journey for someone to really see why rebellion is necessary, why you can't just, you know, sit by and deal with oppression and authority. There's only one way out, as he would say. So
Yeah, and what I really liked about him is going into the show, I expected him to already be characterized the way he was in Rogue One, like super into the rebellion and all, because that's like all I've ever seen of him, right? So I expected him to already be there, considering what time the show was going to take place. But then we go in, and 5 years before Rogue One, he's still not in the rebellion. He doesn't care about it. So it was really cool to see like how little time it took for everything that happened to him to make him care about the rebellion. And I loved seeing that arc of him going through what he went through and deciding, you know what, yeah, I do want to be part of the rebellion, and I do want to be like super into it and do like whatever I need to do to accomplish the rebellion's goals.
Yeah, I mean, Andor as a character in Rogue One was one of those characters that he's a pleasant surprise in this show because he's a character that we saw in Rogue One. I personally, when I saw him, I'm like, I don't need necessarily any more context on him. Like his where he sits in this rebellion is very clear, and it was refreshing when Rogue One showed that hey, the rebellion isn't just the World War II propaganda of the good guys versus the big bad guy. There's some dark stuff in the rebellion that just has to happen because in any major conflict in any major war, underneath the conventional warfare and the portraying themselves as the good guy that each side will do, there's a dark underbelly just that exists. Shoot, some of that dark underbelly has been in Star Wars movies, like from the real world. Christopher Lee was that dark underbelly in World War II, and he ended up being in Star Wars later. And so it was a character that was like, I don't really need to have as much context or backstory on because like where he sits is very clear. And then the Andor show was announced, and I'm like, okay, this is a really cool possibility. I look forward to what they're doing with it. And then they show it, and it became very real. They did a very realistic portrayal of how you get to that point. And in our current present world, we typically associate that with like extremism because that's the way we think of modern conflict now. But if you look at every freedom fighter movement from almost every country on earth that has had a freedom fighter quote unquote movement trying to go against its current government, they kind of target and take people who are positioned like Andor, who are, you know, oppressed, who have crappy lives, who are being beaten down by the system, and they add fire to that, they add fuel to that, and that ends up becoming the source of their true believer like mentality, right? And Andor as a show shows that. We see him having to go through the Imperial prison system, which is brutal. We see the impact not just on his family, but of Imperial occupation on his world. This already like blue collar working class world now has like a direct fascist state tied to it. So we see all of these impacts, and it slowly but surely shifts his perspective as he sees it. You see some of the like worst players in this scene, and that slowly pushes him towards becoming that freedom fighter, that like true believer in the movement. And I think that that's very realistic. So it's a character that like when he was shown in Rogue One, we didn't necessarily need his backstory in order to understand who he was and what he was doing. But by having his backstory, there's a huge amount of depth to the rebellion as a whole, and seeing how his character goes from point A to point B adds a lot of depth to the universe.
Yeah, and I think what you said about like how like freedom fighters are like kind of born. I think something that I was talking to like my friends about, or something that like they mentioned, is like you'll go through all this stuff, but like your like center morals won't change. So like I think a lot of people talk about with Cyril Karn is like, oh, like he's gonna have like a redemption in season 2. And I personally don't want to see it happen. I don't think it will happen because it doesn't make any sense for it to happen. You know, like I think I know like Star Wars is all about like redemption and like, you know, like Anakin coming back from like the dark to the light. But it's like with someone like Cyril Karn, he believes in the Empire as the best thing, as the right thing for the galaxy. And someone like that doesn't take 180, you know? And same thing with Cassian is like, ever since he's a child, he's believed in his autonomy and his independence. He's been fighting against the system in his own little way, but meeting Luthen, meeting like all these people are just pushing him to more of that extreme. And so I just think that's really interesting. It's like, yeah, like it shows us that people like Cyril, people like Cassian on kind of opposite ends of the spectrum are still kind of similar in the way that they're so dedicated to their cause. And basically my point here is I don't want Cyril to get a redemption because that's really stupid. And same with like Dedra, like people, like I've seen people say that she's going to get a redemption in season 2 and like somehow join the rebellion and defect, but I don't think that's gonna, like that makes no sense for a character.
I would love for there to be a Star Wars property that just lets its bad guys be bad guys without being the ultimate evil in the universe.
Yeah.
Like we had that possibility in the sequel trilogy, but we gave a redemption to our baddie in the sequel trilogy. We gave her redemption, obviously, to the original trilogy baddie, because that was kind of the whole arc of that. I would love a Star Wars property that's just like, this dude's a bad dude, and then just leaves it at that.
Yeah, because I mean, we meet Cyril as someone who's not really a super malicious person at heart. He doesn't want to like harm people, but like he's just a bad guy. He believes the empire is legit. He thinks fascism is the only answer. And to see him turn against that, I mean, if the show was like 7 seasons long and they put him through all kinds of situations, then maybe I could see him turn. But like, we have 1 season left in this show. I don't want to see Cyril or Dedra turn because Dedra as well is like the embodiment of fascism to Cyril, basically, right? And that's why he kind of latches onto her in a metaphorical sense, not a literal sense, please. But yeah, so I mean, it's very interesting how in the finale, Dedra is going to be at a place of disgracement or disgrace because she failed on Ferrix. Andor is gone. There was a full-on riot, but Cyril still believes in her. He still believes in fascism. He thinks, this is the answer. And I'm very interested to see where they go in season 2. Because I just see them going further down the rabbit hole, doing more and more dark things to not only find Cassian specifically, but in general to crush any other rebel cells who are in their way, basically. And I don't really see any other way for their arc to go realistically, if I'm being honest.
Talking about Cyril, I think from his first introduction in episode 1, I was like, wow, like this is like real, and like Shane obviously already talked about how real Andor was, but Cyril is a villain in the way that he is an enabler. And like, yeah, sure, like maybe he's not going out there and like beating people on the street, but he's the one that like enables it. And his like harsh belief in the empire is what enables the empire to grow, is like people like him, like people who believe that this is the only way that the galaxy can run, kind of like enables the empire to continue it and thrive and continue to do what it does. And I just think that was really new for Star Wars at the very least to see. And that was, yeah, just like how real the show was in general was just like my favorite thing. And because talking about that, like the empire and what it does, like I forget what, but it was like the empire, like the emperor in one of like their ISB meetings made that whole new law because of one little thing that happened. And it was like, yeah. And then I've seen people like talk about this too, is like the empire thrived because of people like Cyril Karn, but it cannot be like functional because of like incompetence and like nepotism and stuff within the bureaucracy. And because the emperor is so like concerned with keeping his iron grip over the galaxy that he's gonna like retaliate against the entire galaxy for one little slip up, and I just think that was really cool to see, because like you see it in Thrawn, like in the Thrawn books, it's like Thrawn is surrounded by idiots sometimes. And yeah, they're idiots because like they have rich parents, or like they have parents in high places. And it's like, and I think that's why tying this to real life, that's why things like the empire won't work, or like they'll always be like riddled with incompetency and like not getting anything done.
Yeah, I mean, the show has presented a very good argument for, like, by definition, like how the Empire was always going to fail. Because in Nemec's manifesto, there's a couple lines. I can't recall exactly, but I think it was like, tyranny requires constant effort. Authority is like the mask of fear. Basically, how, by definition, you're not going to prevent every insurrection, every small act of rebellion around the galaxy. and it's going to add up eventually. Sooner or later, it's going to add up, and the Empire will crumble, which is what happened in Universe. So
I
And
mean,
I think the great thing about Cyril and Daedra is that's what they want to happen, and I want to see them continue to fight for that to happen, because Daedra failed on Ferrix, and so what I want to see is her continuing to just do more and more and more and do more horrible things, and the same with Cyril if he ever gets to that point, and and for them to just keep trying and keep failing, and eventually the Empire falls because it's not sustainable.
so with Cyril, there is a job opening because Cinta killed one of Dedra's assistants. So there's that.
I mean, the show really really makes it clear and points out that dark deeds are born out of the silence of bystanders. Um, Evil is monotonous. It is boring, because that is how it thrives. And this show shows the Empire is boring. Like, Cyril Karn works at like the Imperial Standards Weights and Measures place at some point. Like, he's working at the place that defines an ounce. Like, it is a boring, monotonous thing. And we see a lot of ineffective Empire in Star Wars media because we want to root for the good guy and we want it to be that propaganda. But Andor shows that, like, the Empire, yeah, there's a lot of idiots because they got parents in high places, but there's a lot of people who aren't idiots. And while some of our heroes have encountered a lot of the idiots, some of our heroes are encountering people who are not in any way an idiot. They are incredibly smart and incredibly dangerous, and they are utilizing that silence of the bystander to be able to do their dark deeds throughout the show. I mean, think about how long it took Ferrix to riot. They only rioted at the end because the Empire tried to interrupt a funeral. Like, they had citizens regularly kidnapped and tortured, and they were still like, I'm good. Like, it really shows the silence of the bystanders building into this darker empire, and how choosing not to be silent anymore can be just as revolutionary as actually going and setting a bomb underneath an Imperial barracks.
Yeah, that's one aspect of the show I thought was super cool. Like, how do you fight? How do you rebel? It's not just picking up a blaster and shooting stormtroopers. There's multiple ways to fight. And I think this is kind of where Luthen as a character kind of comes in, because his arc is actually very reminiscent of an EU novel called Twilight Company. There's a character in that novel who has almost the same arc as Luthen. And basically, um, Luthen essentially has an almost imperial mindset about rebellion. He treats people like Saw Gerrera and Ansel Krieger as pawns in his longer game, right? He's not someone like Luke Skywalker who's fighting out of his own heart, his own honor to go kill a Death Star, right? No, Luthen treats the whole thing like a game of chess. He's willing to sacrifice a piece like Anto Krieger if he needs to. He's probably even willing to sacrifice Saw if he needs to, right? And his arc beautifully culminated with the funeral on Ferrix because he noticed a spontaneous act of rebellion. There was no moving chess pieces in place. There was no big plan. He came in with Val and Cinta and this whole scheme to assassinate Cassian because he knew one detail too much or something like that. But it became irrelevant as soon as that first brick was thrown, as soon as the first blaster shot was fired, as soon as that rebellion started. And that's to Luthen what he missed. That's what an actual rebellion is, because if your objectives in fighting authority become purely military, you've lost scope of the larger fight. You can't fight someone the size of the Empire, using those kinds of tactics. You have to win over the hearts and minds of the people. You have to recruit people like Cassian instead of throwing them away like pawns. So his journey of how do you fight a rebellion was very interesting, because you have his whole monologue in episode 10 to Lonnie, the ISB plant, about like, I've made my mind a sunless base. You guys all know it by now, I'm assuming, but he's basically someone he's lost all hope. He thinks this is all he can dedicate his life towards. And for him to find hope at the end of that season, to be like, there's someone else out there who can inspire people, because he just witnessed Cassian's mom inspire a full-out riot on the street of Ferrix like beyond anything he'd imagined. He was like, we're gonna methodically go in, take out Cassian, and leave. Right? He never imagined this. So it's a great arc. It's just, how do you truly win a rebellion? You have to win over these kinds of people. You got to recruit them to your cause, right?
Yeah, I think Luthen was definitely everyone's definitely in their top characters because he was just such a complex character in the way like how he conducted himself. Like I think what really hit me was that scene where he was like putting on like the wig in his ship and like practicing his like smile like in the ship when he was going into Coruscant. Like I think that like I was like, wow, like this guy is like he has a lot going on. And yeah, like what you said about the end, like he just saw these people just acting in the heat of the moment because their emotion hit the brim and they had to get it out somehow. And yeah, like I think he really did like lose sight of what the rebellion was about and like what it was for. It's it's for the people. I think to Luthen earlier, it was just about overthrowing the empire, you know? And yeah, like that's what it's about, but it's also about the people. Like you can't overthrow the empire and replace it with a government that does the exact same thing. Like, right? Like you can't overthrow a government in the name of the people and put another one where the people's lives aren't any better. Because that's kind of what happened with like the Republic, right? Like we saw even like Clone Wars season 7. Like they didn't really like the Trace and Prophet like didn't care that like the Republic was gone. Like they didn't care because their lives were no different. And I think that's what was really interesting. And because I haven't read any of the books set after episode 6, what I'm assuming is that the new government that they set up after the Empire was kind of no different for the lives of the people, because obviously like the First Order rises up and they become the new power in the galaxy. So I just think that's really interesting to see just like this cycle, but also what Andor is saying about what must be done in a rebellion.
I mean, we kind of see that in The Mandalorian. Just kind of tying to the point of like, with the New Republic, was it really any different? Like when some like laws are broken and some dark stuff happens and an Imperial remnant appears in The Mandalorian. The Mandalorian is asked, well, the Mandalorian is told, hey, you could report this to the New Republic, and the Mandalorian's like, well, what a joke. Like he sees it as a joke, and I think that's pretty telling of the average galactic citizen, what they think of the different changes in power over such a short span of time.
Yeah, and then talking about Luthen and how he fights, that's obviously like that's the big contrast in Andor is how he fights and how Mon Mothma fights. Because they're obviously each fighting their own battles in very different ways, right? Even though they're working towards the same goal. I think when I think about Mon's arc in Andor, I'm not really thinking about the rebellion, but I'm thinking what really spoke to me was the stuff with her daughter and her husband and everything that happened in her family life. Because I think it was really, really interesting. Well, one, how people talked about again the costume design for the family, how it was a little bit Orientalist, but that's beside the point. Again, we know that Star Wars loves doing that. But I think it was really interesting how her daughter herself chose to go back to the traditional Chandrilan ways. And Mon was like, I don't want that for her. And like that scene, and because that reveal that she's cousins with Belle, like that too, it's like her family has been, or like I guess Mon herself has been like moving away from that, but then seeing her daughter want to go back to the old ways just hurt her so much. And that was my favorite part about her character arc, at least.
Yeah, Mon Mothma is such a compelling character because she was in like 20 seconds of Return of the Jedi, was in like a deleted scene in episode 3, and then was in like nothing else. And then in the last couple of years, she's been in like everything, like Clone Wars, Rebels, some of the books, Alpha Squadron, and Andor. And Andor is the biggest like role she's ever had. And yeah, like you said, Brian, like her family drama was really compelling to me. I really enjoyed the scene in the finale where she plays the ISB driver into thinking that her husband is doing something sketch with the money when really it's her. Like I forget how she did that exactly, but I thought that was really clever. But her arc was also kind of sad because it's like you see the sacrifices she has to make for the rebellion. You know, it's like she has to sacrifice her own daughter's future to get the money she needs to keep the rebellion going. But at a certain point, it's like if you're sacrificing your own family to fight for this idea, what do you really value more? You know, the actual people next to you or this arbitrary idea which hasn't even started? And she believes in the idea. She believes in it so much that she gives up her daughter's future. You know, her husband might be taken away by the Empire because of what she made the ISB driver suspects. And it really goes to show how much she believes in that idea, which I thought was very, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the show features a lot of discussion of like sacrifice, and we've talked a lot about how the show also features a lot of like realism. And I think one of the most real things they did for Mon Mothma as a character is they showed that she has problems at home, which there's more than one character in the show that have problems at home, but like hers are particularly poignant. I think that Star Wars also, like in recent years, has started to explore more the breadth of their galaxy. So having the problems at home be tied to distinct elements of Chandrilan culture, I think is a really promising and cool direction to go, because it ties our characters not just to the context of what they're doing in the galaxy as a whole against the Empire and all that, but it also like ties in like cultural relativism. They're all coming from a different spot in the galaxy, which means they're also all going to be going through unique things in their day to day that are going to be affecting their ability to be able to be part of the rebellion or the Empire or any of these larger movements. And I personally really like it when Star Wars actually takes a little bit of time to add a little bit of details about where our characters came from culturally. I mean, that's probably the anthropology nerd in me coming out. This is what happens when you get somebody who minors in anthropology, who watches these shows. But like, instead of having it just be like, if you think about it, in the original films, the rebellion, everyone basically acted the same. They all had the same problems for the most part. They all came from the same context, even though Luke came from like an impoverished desert planet where slavery still exists, but we conveniently never see it in the original trilogy. And he had the same exact like philosophy and way of viewing things as Princess Leia, a person who grew up is as royalty on a monarchist planet that's like wealthy. To me, that always felt a little bit odd. So having Mon Mothma like have to not just go through the problems of her finances, not just go through the problems of the rebellion, but also go through problems at home that are distinctly tied to her like cultural heritage, and how her culture like views things like marriage and behavior the old ways, I think is a really cool amount of depth. I mentioned depth a lot. It's a recurring theme with this show, and I hope they do more of it in the future. Not the least for the fact that Chandrilans have some style. That architecture, oh boy, I will stand Chandrilan architecture any day of the week. It's solid.
Yeah, and then I think that contrast between Luthen and Mon goes back to what we see in Rebels and what Anish was talking about, holding on to that hope, that idea. Is Saw repeatedly accuses Mon Mothma of being too idealistic in her fight against the Empire. We see that everywhere. Like, correct me if I'm wrong, but doesn't he like call her out publicly?
Yeah,
Right?
he broadcasts himself at the Yavin base and calls her out in front of the entire alliance. So yeah, no, I mean Saw was very cool in this show. I like the scene between him and Luthen specifically. The second one where Luthen's all like, "Oh, I might have a spy," and Saw goes like full paranoid. He's like, "Wait, who is it?" And like, I don't know. It's a cool tie into Rogue One to show how he became more paranoid, but also it's like it really highlights Saw's dichotomy with Mon Mothma because Mon Mothma is idealistic. She works toward peace, Saw is so paranoid even about his own people. He thinks there's a spy in his inner circle. He doesn't trust anyone really. And that's where he is in Rogue One, but now we're showing, how he kind of got there, which was pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think again that shows what needs to happen for a revolution to happen is you can't be like Saw, but you also can't be like Mon Mothma. Like you kind of have to be like Luthen at the end of the season, where it's like he's still being realistic about what has to happen, but he also, yeah, or also like Cassian, like you also can't forget about what it's for. And I think Cassian's time on Narkina 5 definitely played into that. And can we just like talk about the whole prison arc? Because I think we can all agree that the prison arc was the best arc of the season. And I knew that Andy Serkis was a good actor, but I really only seen him in mocap. But having him be out of mocap, be Kino, be someone else in Star Wars, really highlight like that made the arc was Kino. When I first saw Andy Serkis, I was like, oh wow, that's a cool cameo. I did not expect him to be an actual character. I was just like, oh, they just got the guy that played Snoke to just be in this little like throwaway character. But no, I did tear up when he said, I can't swim. Like it was great.
Me too. And I really want him to be in season 2. They didn't confirm if he made it off the prison or if he died or whatever. I want him to come back because he was such a great character. And I liked him a lot. And I don't want him to be dead after only that one arc.
I just want like a random line in the background on some broadcast being like, the surviving prisoners from Narkina were sent to Exegol, and then everyone's gonna go insane.
See, that's what I don't want.
Yeah, it would be really cool to see him again. Yeah, just like that whole prison arc, I think it again shows how Cassian isn't a leader. He's like an inspirer. He's an inspiration to others to lead. And I think that again is so different from what we see. Because it's like Leia was this strong leader. Luke was also like a leader, like in his own right. But he also inspired millions of people. But we see Cassian directly inspire Kino to make that speech, to tell people there's only one way out. There's more of us than them, and that was really cool to see.
Yeah, I think a lesser show would have had Cassian be the one to make the speech, but it was a very intentional choice to, have him be the one to inspire Kino to make the speech. Because again, 2 or 3 episodes ago, he was on Aldhani, he was running, he was just looking for money. So you can't go from a person like that to a person who gives a speech to 5,000 people out of nowhere, right? But he knows Kino can do it. He's able to find good leaders. He can see the good in others. He looks at Kino and he's like, this guy actually cares for the people. He should be the one to lead, because consider if Cassian made the speech, it would not have been as effective. The inmates don't know Cassian. They have no idea who he is, right? He showed up like 2 days ago, basically, right? But they know who Kino is, and it was a very strong choice in that sense.
It creates a parallel too between Cassian and Luthen, because if you think about it, Luthen's much farther along in his journey of supporting the rebellion, but he's doing the same thing. The only difference is Luthen is doing it in he's doing it farther in the dark. Like Cassian is inspiring people like Kino. Luthen is inspiring people like our ISB plant, Mon Mothma, Cassian himself, small rebel cell. Like it's a very similar idea where Luthen is not a leader. In the textbook that would be written in the Star Wars universe, they probably would never even mention his name. But he was behind many of the leaders that became important later on in Star Wars. He stoked the fire. He poked at them with little sticks until they finally got up and they did something about it. And it becomes really interesting because you've got this parallel. And Luthen is kind of doing it in more of a way that reflects, it shows class struggles and classism and the separation of social stratification in Star Wars, because Luthen's dealing with the ultra rich of people like Mon Mothma and his like luxury antiques store, and then going down to the poorest of the poor, working class for Ferrix, whereas Cassian's operating primarily in that like less a class struggle and more the general get the people moving vibe, because he only operates, in the prisons and in the working class and all that. But despite the fact that they're reflecting on different in their characters different elements of the empire and like commenting on different things in the real world, they're both doing the same things. They have a parallel in that they are both, neither of them are the people you write in the textbook as the great hero that saved everyone, but they're the ones who inspired that hero to step forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting, and I totally agree. Like, yeah, like they're not the people that you read about. They're they're the people behind the scenes, but they're equally as important, if not the most important part, because without them, where would they be? Right. So I think that's really interesting. And then again, talking about that class struggle, one thing that I loved about Andor was like you see it in the prison riot, you see it in the riot on Ferrix. It's solidarity between everyone, knowing that they're united in the struggle against the Empire. That was my favorite part. Like I was like on my feet, like cheering like it was a football game when like those prisoners were like running out. Like it was like I loved it. Yeah, and just talking about the prisoners and the people on Ferrix, like uh Bix, Marva, Brasso, it's like these characters, and especially with Brasso, I think it was really like him being the first one to punch that officer with Marva's brick. It was like, yeah, okay. Because I, I don't know if this was made obvious, but I kind of got the vibe that he was the person that people like looked up to on Ferrix as like a big brother type guy. And so obviously like he kept his head down for the rest of the show, but when when he threw that first brick, everyone else was like, okay, like it's our time now. Um, and that was super cool to see. And like, yeah, I was like cheering when that happened.
Yeah, the coolest part of the finale was how the people of Ferrix were the main characters in a sense, right? Because up to that point, we got our Luthen scenes, we got our Cassian scenes, we got Mon Mothma, but I mean, they had their moments in the finale, sure, but like the people of Ferrix were the main characters. Marva is the one to inspire this crowd, and we see all these random people, like Brasso for one. You have the comms guy Zan. You had the kid whose father got hanged. You had him be the one to throw the bomb. You see all these random people who we saw here and there throughout the series completely unite and fight the Empire. Because I think, again, in a lesser show, they would have had less of those Ferrix citizens, maybe like one or two people that Cassian knew, and then just kind of moved on from Ferrix. But like they fleshed out the culture of Ferrix so much in those early 2 to 3 episodes, so that by the time we get to the finale and we see all the people of Ferrix unite, you feel a sense of unity and culture among those people. You feel like this is an actual community. You feel camaraderie, I guess that's the word I'm looking for. And I feel like it was a really good payoff of everything they'd set up early on about the people of Ferrix's day-to-day lives, just doing whatever. But now when their community is threatened, when they have members killed, and when someone who is like a grandmother to the community, Marva, encouraging them to fight, they're gonna fight. They're not gonna stop. And I have to mention the time grappler, because him kicking that trooper off, I actually cheered. That was amazing. But yeah, as a whole, the finale was amazing because the focus was on one planet, one rebellion, which is representative of so many other rebellions. Because simultaneously to Andor, we have Lothal happening in Star Wars Rebels. We have a rebellion over there. There's other stuff happening in the EU, like Solo's happening around this time as well, the ride on Kessel, right? So we have all these kinds of things occurring around the same time. And Ferrix was just a really great example of like you see this one planet, this community, there's millions more just like this one, and that's what the rebellion really is about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I want to actually take this and transition it into a question for all of y'all, because the question being what you want to see in season 2, because I think season 2, I believe they mentioned, goes like pretty close up to Rogue One, if I remember right. And so the thing that I want to see in season 2 actually relates to this and to the class struggles that we talked about earlier, and about like the different classes of people we talked about, like prisoners and the working class of Ferrex. By the time Rogue One happens, by the time we get A New Hope, the leaders that are most commonly cited and seen in the rebellion that crystallize are upper class. They're the Mon Mothmas, they're the senators, they're the people married to royalty. You know, they're the people who, in the old system of the Republic, they see the Republic as a great thing because they had a voice that suddenly got taken away. But that voice still was much more of a voice than the people of Ferrex. People of Ferrex probably never had a voice in the old system. And so the thing I would love to see season 2 address is, where do people like the revolution on Ferrex, the average citizens of Lothal, the people who escaped from the prison, where do these people who aren't upper class senators, royals, like, how do they fit into the larger structure of where we get to by A New Hope, where it's an organized rebellion with a military, ranks, a whole structure? They have their own political system they're working with. How do these people, who are the backbone of revolution, who we see are causing the fire throughout the galaxy individually, fit into this new revolutionary system that we see by episode 4, where it's echoing where they were before, where again it is these upper strata who are making the decisions for these people who are going off to fight? Where do these people fit into that? Is there any struggle within that, within the rebellion? I would love to see that in season 2, but I'm curious what the rest of you would like to see in season 2 of Andor.
I honestly don't know what I want to see in season 2, because I know that season 2 is gonna be like 4.5 years. It's taking us right from the end of season 1 up to Rogue One. So I honestly don't know what I want to see. I feel like I would want to see, like what Liam said earlier, like Dedra and Cyril try and just fail over and over and over again. And maybe not because of their own like incompetence, but because of the incompetence of others. That was my favorite, because honestly, in the beginning, not I wasn't rooting for Dedra, but I was rooting for her in the way I was rooting for Thrawn in the first Thrawn novel, whereas like I wanted him to get Night Swan, you know, like I wanted him to capture Night Swan, but at the same time, I didn't, you know. But that was the same thing with with sorry, I'm blanking on the name, but like it was the same thing here. It's like I was rooting for her to catch the rebels on Aldhani. Like I was like, oh, like what if it happens? Then what? You know, because that wasn't out of the question, which I think was so different. It was like it wasn't out of the question for Dedra to catch them. And so that's just one of like I kind of want to see more of that in season 2, is like they're trying so hard to keep their faith in this system, but they keep getting failed by it. And not to take pleasure in their suffering, but it is to take pleasure in their suffering. I think that's what I want to see the most.
Yeah, so sort of on the flip side of that, I do also want to see Dedra and Cyril get taken down by the Imperial system, but I also want to see Luthen rise up due to the rebel system. I want him to see more of these communities, more of these organized rebel efforts that give him hope to recruit more people like Cassian. Like in Rogue One, we have that whole team of Melshi and all the other rebel pathfinders that go with them to Scarif. What if we see some more of them show up? What if we see Luthen go and recruit some more of those guys and be like, you're a good leader, we could use you, like what's his name, General Merrick, blue leader. Some random people like him, random Glepshitos from Rogue One. I kind of just want to see them come back, honestly. But mainly to see Luthen be the kind of guy who is now a responsible, hopeful rebel leader. And in terms of Cassian, he's now someone who's committed to the rebellion. But now I want to see him be someone who will do dark things for that rebellion. I want to see him be a spy, a saboteur, an assassin, do the dark things he was talking about in Rogue One. Because to be honest, we haven't really seen that, because this season was about him becoming a rebel. Now that he is a rebel, let's show how far he's willing to go as a rebel. So that's something I want to see. And then obviously K2, he's going to be in season 2 to some extent. I don't know when they'll introduce him because, like Brian said, it's like 4 years before, 3 years before, all the way up to Rogue One. So I don't know when they meet. There's a comic, but they'll retcon it. I'm 100% sure. But yeah, I'm very excited to see K2, kind of how they meet and how K2 plays into Cassian's arc, because I don't see Tony Gilroy being the kind of guy to just introduce K2 and be like, okay, he's here for comedy, let's just leave him in there. He's going to find a way to introduce K2 in a way that speaks to Cassian's arc and who he is. And I'm very excited to see how that'll happen.
Yeah, me too. I'm very excited to see how K2 is introduced in this series. And I'm also excited to see just how the squad in Rogue One comes together in the show, if they're going to do that at all. Because you mentioned Melshi, and I remembered being very excited to see him when they introduced him in the prison. I was like, oh my God, that's one of the guys from Rogue One. He didn't do anything, but he was there. And so I want to see, like, I also want to see possibly Luthen recruiting all of these other random people, because I don't remember anyone's names aside from Cassian, Jin, and Melshi because it was in the subtitles, and also Pow, simply because I made that complicated question in that Kahoot that I did for one of our events. But I'd love to see all these random characters come together and just see how the Rogue One squad ended up with those specific people.
Out of curiosity, what would the opinion be of them having an episode where suddenly K2 is there and they don't retcon his intro, they just say it happened off screen?
I would be 100% fine with that, because again, respect for the comics. It's not a Filoni thing to do, but I hope Andor does it. So
me too. I would love to see that, simply because I really like it when they tie in stuff that's canon but off screen. Like,
Yeah.
Ahsoka novel was retconned. I really hated that because it was canon up until Tales of the Jedi, and now it's not. So if we can keep comics and novels canon that are currently canon, that's all I want for the rest of the creation of the Star Wars saga.
Okay, I lied. There is something that I want to see in season 2, and it's a Night Swan Thrawn mention by Luthen, because that would fit in perfectly. Like, obviously Luthen wasn't mentioned in Thrawn, but like on the offhand, he's like, oh, some rebel cell just got crushed by this brand new alien officer. Just offhand, I would love that. I think that would make my year.
That would be really cool, because it would also tie into the whole no fan service thing, but then they gave us like really little cameos. So like if they just name dropped Thrawn, that would be awesome.
It's the perfect type of fan service to include. Yeah. It's like, you don't want Thrawn showing up in an episode and outsmarting Luthen, or them going to Mandalore and who showing up, but like, subtle mentions. Like there was that one ISB meeting in one of the episodes where they were like, something happened on Ryloth, and I'm like, okay, that was in Rebels. And I'm like, that's a cool tie-in. So yeah,
or it's like people, I mean, I don't think people are being serious about this, but when they saw Yularen, they're like, oh, who was Yularen's like best friend? Thrawn. So like people are like, I had a more than a little bit hope that he would on the offhand mention his new friend in one of his episodes, but obviously that didn't happen. But I'm saying, like, yeah, like that's the perfect type of fan service. Like, I don't want Thrawn to show up on screen because that takes away from the rest of the story. But yeah, just like these little like throwaway lines are nice.
Yeah, there's a very fine line to walk between which characters you can include and mention and which you can't. And there's not really a way to explain it. It's more of just like, we're telling a story here that's about Cassian Andor, about Luthen, about Mon Mothma, and characters like Yularen and Saw were included in service of their stories and their arcs and to move the plot along. So if you bring in a cameo, you have to think like, is this character necessary to include? Are they going to directly advance our story by being this character, right? Because Yularen had to be Yularen. You needed a higher up ISB guy to pull up and be like, we're making this new law after Aldhani, right? That made sense. A example I'll contrast with this is Kanan in the Bad Batch. That did not need to be Kanan. It could have been any random Padawan, right? but Andor knew how to do it, right? Like Saw Gerrera makes sense. He's the extremist rebel, right? So Andor used cameos very well in season 1, and I hope season 2 does the same thing. I would like to see Bail Organa. I think he's somebody who's a friend of Mon Mothma and makes sense to be there in universe at this time. I would like to see other random rebel cells, people like Enfys Nest from Solo and the Cloud Riders. They fit the tone of the show, and that would be a good inclusion of another rebel cell. But I don't want to see Ezra Bridger showing up with the lightsaber and taking out everyone on Ferrix and just running off. Like, there's a fine line. So
Yeah, and like from a business standpoint, like I think most fans we get it. Star Wars as a franchise in Lucasfilm, they're releasing just an inordinate amount of material coming up, and they've got to build excitement for this material, and they've got to keep people reminded that it's coming out. But I think that I agree in that the best way to do it is to take the approach that Andor has so far, where it's like you only bring in a character to actually appear on screen if it's necessary. But you can mention the other things that are happening around the galaxy and still build excitement. I agree that like it should have been some other Padawan in Bad Batch, especially since they have all of these other franchise materials coming out. Instead of tying it to a past material, I would have preferred Bad Batch season 1 if they tied it to some future thing that's coming out that is related to it, or if they did tie it to a past material, tie it to the comics. Like canonically in the comics, we have a ton of Jedi that survived. They're listed in one of the panels in one of the comics, several of them that lived. And so like it's a thing where it's like I I think there is a lesson in Andor's success over like pleasing fans, and that it's just kind of dropping hints. And I think that most fans will understand if you have to like bring in something in order to excite people for an upcoming project. Like, let's take Book of Boba Fett. Mando going to help Boba Fett on Tatooine as a principal, that makes sense. If you think about it from both a business and storytelling standpoint, Mando is already a friend of Boba Fett. Boba Fett need hired muscle. Mando is a gun for hire. Like, these things fit from a business standpoint. It reminds people, hey, season 3 of The Mandalorian's coming out. But I think what caused frustration from a lot of fans there is that instead of just having Mando come back for that, there was a whole Mando arc with Grogu and the Jedi Academy and all of that they could have just had 2 extra episodes in The Mandalorian season 3. I mean, we've seen from Andor, fans will sit through long seasons. We will sit through a lot of episodes. We will happily do that. And we'll sit through a lot of episodes that are long. So I guess I agree in that I'm like you, Brian. I now have a new a new goal for season 2, and that I want to see cameos just like what you mentioned, but specifically in the way you mentioned it. Like, just say the names like on screen. Just say that a thing happened. Don't have Ezra Bridger show up. Please don't. Or if you do, make him like Ezra Bridger at that time, where he's just kind of a whiny brat and doesn't know how to use the lightsaber. Dude obsessed with Meluran fruit. Like, don't have all of these characters pop up randomly.
Yeah. And with all this talk about other stuff that's outside of Andor and the TV series, like, and I know in our last episode we did talk about other books. Anish, your Alphabet Squadron conversation was really good. And like, is there anything else that's similar to Andor
So
other
I
than
mean,
Alphabet Squadron?
so in terms of other Star Wars material, obviously Rogue One, I'm assuming everyone's seen Rogue One, but like that is very similar in tone to Andor for like that kind of dark war story. So if you're someone who's gotten into Star Wars through Andor, I know one person who did that actually. He watched Andor first and then watched Rogue One. He was shocked that Cassian died. But yeah, no, Rogue One, I mean, is the most similar thing we've gotten to Andor in live action. Even if we go to the animated shows, I don't think anything really has the tone of Andor. All the animated shows are Filoni shows for the most part, and they all kind of have their own tone. So then that brings us into books. And I have ranted extensively about Alphabet Squadron, and I do not have the voice in me to do it again. Please check out our last episode, and please read the trilogy. That is the most similar piece of content to Andor I can think of. It doubles down on everything that makes Andor good. And along the same lines, I mentioned a novel, Twilight Company. It's by the same author, Alexander Freed. It's about a rebel infantry unit. And again, very similar world building to Andor. You get the point of view of Imperials that remind me a lot of Cyril and Dedra. There's this guy who's a believer in the Empire to the extent that he scars his face to look like the Emperor, and his dialogue sounds a lot like Cyril's. I thought he was a very funny character. So people like that are very present in this book. So Twilight Company, Alphabet Squadron. I would recommend Rebel Rising. It's about Saw Gerrera, specifically about Jyn, about the partisans. So if you want more Rogue One adjacent content with the tone of Andor, read that book. That book has the darkest scene I've read in any piece of Star Wars content, and it's not even close. It's like a Saw Gerrera torture scene. And if you want more gritty stuff like Andor, that's the next place to go. Now, if you're willing to go to Legends as well, and you want other content with the tone of Andor, there's the X-Wing series, which is about pilots more so than the common soldiers. And this is also post episode 6. So it's about, again, what does the New Republic do now that the Empire's losing and they're winning? And it's very gritty. It's got the tone of Andor. It's got relatable characters. There's only one Force-sensitive character who doesn't discover it until the end of the series, so it's not plot relevant. It's just about regular people, right? It's about the politics of the surviving empire, the New Republic senators. Mon Mothma plays a key role in all those books, and that's a very good read. I am through 7 of the 10 books. I'm enjoying that series a lot. Aside from that, I can't think of a ton of new canon books that really are like Andor. I would love to see more, ideally written by Alexander Freed or Timothy Zahn. I mean, Thrawn. We've discussed Thrawn, but like the
Yeah,
Thrawn
I
series
was gonna say
is
Thrawn.
especially the stuff with Dedra and the ISB. Thrawn is very similar to that. So if you want more of the inner workings of the Empire, check out Thrawn. Thrawn Ascendancy goes more into like the unknown regions. It's not really like the Andor politics, honestly. It's kind of more of its own thing. But at least the first Thrawn, Alliances and Treason, kind of, but those really go into the ISB. Oh, and Tarkin as well. That's a good read. So this is also ISB stuff about Tarkin's rise to power. Very enjoyable book. Yeah, that's all I can think of off the top of my head right now. I probably look at my bookshelf if there's anything I missed. But yeah, that's all I can remember right now.
The original Marvel relaunch of the comic line of Star Wars back during the like earliest like Disney Star Wars materials, there was a one shot during one of their like special issues, I think, where it deals with the story of a rebellion spy on Coruscant. He's a spy in their tax office, I believe. And what happens to him and the 5 other spies on Coruscant? I think it's 5. When they try to like conduct an operation. It's not long. It's not a long read, but it is a good one if you want to get more of that like seedier part of the rebellion, if you want to get into that kind of spy element to the rebellion. And they do refer back to it. I believe that character is the same character who appears later on in the Marvel comic line when they deal with the rebellion prison. In that same comic line. In general, there's a few like there's no full series I can think of, but there are a few like lines in the Star Wars comics where they do short 4 to 5 issues arcs that can be very similar to Andor and to that vibe that they have. Like that the one that comes to mind is that one shot and the prison arc, the rebellion prison.
I also think Lords of the Sith might be a good read if you liked Andor, specifically because it's about one part, honestly not even one part of the rebellion, just one rebellion. It's on Ryloth, led by what was his name? Sham Syndulla, and he's not really part of the rebellion. He's just doing his own thing for Ryloth, so it's very specific to that planet. There is stuff about like the Sith and everything, because Darth Vader's in it, but if you liked the small rebellion part of Andor, Lord of the Sith is a good read.
Yeah, and then while you guys were talking, I thought of actually a couple more. If you like the Mon Mothma stuff specifically, I would read Bloodline. It's about Leia during the New Republic. I want to say this is about 5 to 10 years before The Force Awakens, so it's the decline of the New Republic. It's kind of why they're failing. You get a lot of politics about two different factions within the New Republic, kind of how they're handling things at the time, like, the legacy of the failed Old Republic. Are they going to go down that same route? There's people who are pushing Leia to become the Chancellor, essentially, and she doesn't want to do that. So there's a lot of really cool politics. It kind of has the balance of like, how Mon Mothma's story was about like her personal life as well as the rebellion, the good of the galaxy, that kind of balance. This is basically about that. You get everything you want from a political novel. There are trade disputes, there are assassination attempts, there's a lot of really interesting politics involving Leia and other characters who I don't want to spoil, but are returning characters. But yeah, Bloodline is very good. And then the last one I thought of was Inferno Squad, which is another rebellion-esque story, but it contains Imperials who, at this point, are still Imperials. They believe in the Empire. I don't want to talk about later because some of them defects and it made me sad. But at this point, they're Imperials. And this is about Saw Gerrera's partisans post Rogue One. So there are some that survive. They're led by, this is a spoiler. They're led by someone who is also a returning character. But point being, it has the tone of Andor in the sense that it's a gritty rebellion taking place with just a single cell, just one group of people, like 10 people, I'm pretty sure. But they're still coordinating all these large scale attacks. It has the tone of like, why do you fight and how do you fight at this point? Do you focus on just the military of it? Do you want to win over any particular planet's population, any communities, or do you just want to hit the Empire hard? And you get that same sort of brutality from the Empire. You have people who are true believers like Cyril, who believe that the Empire is the only way to get things done, because this is immediately post Death Star being destroyed. These are Imperials who have seen their friends, their colleagues, some of whom were just low-level clerks and factory workers killed during the Death Star explosion, right? And on that same note, Lost Stars. Brian, do you want to talk about this one, actually?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it before, but Lost Stars just really talks about like the normal people, like their lives, and especially like what Shane was talking about. Like Thane was rich. I'm blanking on, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on her name, but the other
Sienna,
one,
right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and she's like a farmer, like a peasant, and it's just like their lives, how they intersect, and it's just like, and I would say some parts of it does get pretty gritty of Lost Stars, especially for it being like a young adult novel and not like an adult novel. Um, yeah, like it gets into like the day to day, and it's people's ideals and how they change, and they're pretty big changes. And yeah, like it follows them from the rise of the empire to the fall of the empire, and it's just a good read. And yeah, also just like the canon, like the new canon Thrawn novels again, just like reiterating that, like everything about the inner workings of the empire and like how they're kind of doomed to fail. It's really interesting to see coming from Andor.
And I mean, tying it full circle to what we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. If you remove the like monster of the week episodes of Bad Batch and you just deal with the episodes with the Empire, it has a lot of the same elements where they are watching the corruption from within. If you look at the episodes where they go find the new training facility, if you look at what happens to Camino, if you look at the very first episode, you're going to get, albeit a little bit sanitized because it is an animated show that's kind of a little bit at least targeted towards like teenagers. So they're not necessarily going to get as gritty. But like it in the amount it can goes in the same direction. And at least the episode titles from Bad Batch seem to promise that season 2 will have a lot of those elements as well, where you get to see the grittier side of the Empire, specifically in relation to how it deals with the clones. So, tying it full circle to what we talked about way in the beginning of this podcast, you can also find those elements in specific episodes of the Bad Batch.
Yeah, and I think that's a perfect wrap up to this great discussion about Andor and Bad Batch and everything else about Star Wars. It was just, I think, just to wrap it all up again, like Andor, just great. Definitely give it a watch if you guys haven't watched it. Any last comments?
If you haven't watched Andor and you listen to this whole podcast, you must have gotten a lot of stuff spoiled. So sorry about that.
I look forward to the bounty of Chandrillan cosplay that is going to come from this show, because the architecture and style of that culture is phenomenal and also looks incredibly comfortable. So that's my only comment.
Oh no,
Right.
speaking of cosplay, I think next celebration we're gonna get a lot of people dressed in the jumpsuits from Narkino 5.
Oh, I'm
It's a
sure.
very, very easy costume. And you know how they do the running
the
of the
running
Will
of
Row hoods every celebration?
yeah.
There's gonna be like an on program thing, and like 1,000 people are just gonna like rise up, and then everyone's gonna charge like one way out. Like if that doesn't happen, like I'm dropping out of college. So
We can make it
Be,
happen. We should
be the
do it.
change you want to see.
we need to do that
Yeah.
next May 4th. We have to do that. Just storm the chancellor's office.
Yes.
If the strike is, oh wait, no, the strike is over, but still we'll just form our own strike. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it. Thank you for listening, and Trident Squadron